All right, folks, this is a really cool conversation for all of you folks who want to tighten up around the greens, on and around the greens. We've got a PGA Tour winner two-time. He's Swedish deep down, but he's lived in the States for a large portion of his life. He's Gabe Hjertstedt. Gabe, welcome to our show, man. How are you doing?
Very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, I've been a fan for a long time. I worked out on the tour for a long time. Hell, I was teaching golf when you were still playing on the tour out there. So we're sort of aging ourselves a little bit here. And I've been looking forward to catching up with you. So just in the interest of putting you into context for our audience around the world, tell us a little bit about you, how you began, where you got to where you are, et cetera, please.
Well, Swedish born. My parents emigrated to Australia when I was quite young, like 10, 11 years old. And that's when I started playing golf. And, surfing and golf was really the two things that I like to do.
Yeah.
Fortunate enough at 12, 13, because I wasn't a very good junior golfer because I started late compared to people that start 8, 9 years old.
Mm-hmm.
But I was fortunate enough to get hooked up with Charl Schwartzel when I was about 13 years old. Greg Norman's.
What a legend. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think, from there I just started, I went from finishing last in every junior event I played in to a couple of years later, I was winning. So,
wow,
then,
you know what? I think there's a lesson in itself for that, for the young aspirant golfers. They're like, well, if you got a dream, you can do it. But, it's not just kind of beating your head against a brick wall kind of thing. It's making some smart decisions and then finding yourself some forward traction, right?
Exactly. And I think that area on the Gold Coast where I grew up just south of Brisbane, what happened was because Greg Norman, was working his way up the ranks and he became number one in the world. And you had all these young juniors, like in like maybe a 2 or 3 hour, circle,
mm-hmm.
that believing that they could play, So it was like all these junior events every weekend. Everyone was talking about Greg. Everyone's playing golf, 36-hole events every Sunday. Really, they had this Angus Buchanan events, which I thought was incredible. So every Sunday was a 36-hole event.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Young juniors around. So it turned out to be a little melting pot. There's quite a few golfers that, turned their, made into professional careers.
Well, speaking of the professional career, obviously you advance through the ranks and you make it onto the PGA Tour. And that was in the days of going through Q school and tour school and all these rigors. Talk a little bit about just your time spent doing that stuff en route to becoming a PGA Tour winner.
Yeah. So, I started playing in Australia, whereas Mondays qualifiers to get in. And then all of a sudden, if you made the cut, you got into the following week. So I was fortunate enough to start off early playing good. And then, went up to Japan, did the tour school up there. That was a 6-month process to get through there, but I ended up getting through there. And then Europe and eventually to the States. But, it was the mindset, you have to go this route. I should have done the US, but, it was the mindset that they put into you. This is the law. This is how you got to do it. And it's interesting because I look back at that and said, I probably, they're not playing any different golf in Europe to the US or other places, but, it's interesting how it sort of develops, whatever that person's done, that's got to be the right route for everyone else.
Yeah, no kidding. But I think you Swedish, Australian, now American, I'm South African, lived in Europe teaching for a while, now American. There's something to be said for going the long road. Yes, you can circumvent it by coming, to college in the States or whatever the case might be. But for the internationals listening to this, you can gain valuable, experience and stuff along that route, right?
Definitely. I mean, you play different grasses, different conditions, and, different travel. Because, everything in the US, it's pretty sweet traveling. When you play the Asian tour or you play the European tour, you got long trips, bus rides. Here you get off the plane and get a rental car and go. So it's, and the conditions, I think that's the main thing that I took out of it. And that's probably why I developed a good short game or a good game in general, is because you play in a lot of conditions.
I'm glad you say that because I recently had Derek Ingram on this podcast and he is doing fantastic work with the young kids from the Golf Canada, the Canadian setup. And so I was asking him for lessons that, our listeners and viewers can learn from, some of his clients like Corey Connors and Taylor Penrith and this sort of crowd. And then the two West Coasters, Nick Taylor and Adam Hadwin. He said, you can learn because they grew up in such wet, moist conditions. They're as good a greenside pitcher as anyone because they don't dig the leading edge into the ground a whole lot. And so I'm glad you say that, because playing on different grasses teaches you different skills. And I'm sure you advise any young golfer, any skill level, not to always bump it onto a good lie, right? Play from different lies, play from different conditions, and develop your skill to hit those shots, huh?
And I even bring my tour guys to munis. I mean, it's like, to me, it's like I'd rather go to a muni where there's lack of grass, firm conditions, or soft conditions.
Yeah.
And I call it the international. It's the United Nations of grasses. A lot of these. That's one of the things. Is like to play all the different grasses. It's almost like you build a library in your head of how the ball's going to come out. Soft out of this one, jumps out of this one, medium out of this one. Can actually still spin it out of this grass.
Yeah. Hey,
but do that a lot.
Yeah, no, it is worthwhile, certainly. Before we get into just the mechanics of hitting certain greenside shots, which I know everyone wants to listen to, I want to just probe your mind a little bit here in your experience, because you've won on tour, you've won around the globe. You're now sought out by all the leading golfers out there west, largely on the tour, for your expertise around the greens. But before I go there, I want to ask you a few just random questions. Like the one thing, for some of your club golfers that come to you for lessons, what's the biggest mistakes you see made with just basic greenside shots? Is there such a thing? I know it's general.
Yeah, two things. Well, it's really the notion that they think they have to accelerate through the shot. That's one.
Mm-hmm.
The second part is that they think they need to keep their head still, which also leads to them moving backwards most of the time. So what I see is I like a forward motion always when chipping. You know, I don't necessarily like to keep my head still. I believe that there's flippers, right? So I believe 100% that your hands have to lead every single golf shot around the green, except, some flop shots and bunker shots, obviously. But and that's where the main amateurs, they think about the bounce so much, or they get told about the bounce, and they have no clue about the bounce. I just said, just lead with your hands. And if you lead with your hands, at least you're going to make clean contact.
Mm-hmm. Hey, how about along the lines too, because I'm glad you touched that bounce thing, because I just saw a tweet here while I was preparing for this call. It was just a random golf fan that said, what's the most misunderstood golf terms you hear? And a lot of the responses were bounce and grind and stuff like that. And you switch on social media, and some golf gurus like, well, you got to expose the bounce. And then the teacher in me cringes like you do, because then the next thing I see the flipper bounce one into the back of the ball. It's careening off there at 100 miles an hour, and their scorecard's going to doo-doo. What say you?
So if you look at the club in general, right? So you have, you can have a lot of bounce, but it won't play like a lot of bounce. So you can have less bounce and a wide sole, and it'll play like a lot of bounce. So really misleading in that sense. And I like to say, like, you preset the bounce. And I had an argument with someone on Instagram the other day that I was doing it all wrong, but
I find that funny. I find that hilarious.
Think about if you have 9 degrees of bounce on your club, and then you open it up,
it becomes way more. Mm-hmm.
And you can still lead with your hands. So you've engaged the bounce without trying to scoop your hands through it. So
yeah, lovely stuff. All right. Some of the key, we're going to talk about the keys to technique on these different shots, but I just want to point this at you and say, hey, we talked about misunderstandings and stuff. A lot of golfers, they're taught that they've got to match the slope with their shoulders and stuff, but I don't think they ever really think around the greens about the angle of attack of the club, and where the base of the arc is, and where the face is, kind of thing, and kind of where swing path is. So give us the overall explanation to how these shots should be struck, and then we'll dive into them sort of one by one, or by different genre.
So if we look at so really attack angle into the ball, right? So if we look at attack angles, and this is really how far your low point is in front of the golf ball.
Right.
I like to see a lot steeper attack angle, it doesn't mean it's going to be a steep shot or take a divot. It just means your low point is further up past the golf.
Yeah.
So right-handed player sets up the golf ball. You know, everyone looks at the back of the ball on the right side of the golf ball. I say, look on the left side of the ball. All of a sudden, you've moved your low point 1.6 inches forwards. Right? So all of a sudden, you put them on the left side of it. And I always say, so keep your eye on the left side of the ball. That means your arc is going to be further forwards.
Yeah.
That's like a basic little thing that people can relate to, because if I say, listen, I hit down 12 degrees on this shot and I still don't take much of a divot, they say, well, how is that possible? Well, I mean, you're still coming in, you're coming in quite shallow, even though that you're hitting a little bit higher up on the golf ball.
Exactly right. Hey, I love that eye thing because, you know, I remember back in the day, way back in the day, Gary Player talked to me about, you know, out of a certain bunker shots, aim at a dimple on the front side of the golf ball, and he'd zone in on that thing just to sort of vary the angle of attack. I want to go further with this in that what you say, that will promote some of the body pressure moving forward, so you don't get these guys and girls hanging back and scooping shots too badly too if they look at the front of the ball, right?
And it's amazing what that can actually do. I say, listen, try to look at the dimple. If you start on the left side of the ball, as you take the backswing, see if you can see a dimple further down the ball.
I love it.
That ensures you that you're way forward. And it's a very simple way just to take the average guy to sort of say, okay, you know what? I'm hitting behind the ball. I'm obviously looking way behind the ball. So let's look on the front side of the ball. And all of a sudden they start catching it clean.
Hey, you've got my mind spinning now, because as I'm watching you here and the folks can see you on YouTube, Gabe doesn't have a club in his hand. You just see his body tilting to the left and to the right, or forwards and backwards. And as I see you as you go forward, I notice that eye line sort of look a little bit more to your left, just to make that path less into out and kind of more across the ball some, which is, I'm assuming, one of your keys to success as well.
Exactly. So I really like that. You know, I always look at, there's very little draw in any chip. I mean, it's very hard to find a chip shot that you would actually have an inside-out path, unless it's like a straight shot. But time we get a little height on it, it's always going to be a slight fade. I mean, I've measured hundreds of great players, and I've yet to find. I mean, you look at Tiger, you know, they see little draw shots and stuff, but it's a lot of hand manipulation at impact with the face to actually get that ball, you know, spinning a little right to left. I was with Matt Jones one day. He says, I draw my chips. And I said, do you mind if I, you know, put the foresight machine down and have a little look at it? And he's hitting his draw shots, and it's 5 degrees left.
Yeah.
Right. So, well, let me just get in there as well, and I'm going to hit a proper draw so you can see. Okay, so but he was blown away by that.
You know, a lot of it is the feel too, but you're right. You know, every touch shot has got some of that club sweeping across the ball, because as soon as you're giving it the into out, then you energize that thing way too much for all those touch ones around the green.
And we're looking for friction. You know,
Yeah.
I always ping pong is a great analogy how to hit a wedge shot. So if someone comes up and they slice the ping pong across the net, so you're slicing it with a way open face, but the ping pong ball is flying out super low. So
spinning, yeah.
Face low spinner, so it comes out the same way.
Awesome. All right. So you've sort of painted the picture. Let's break it down into each shot. And I want to start sort of greenside and then sort of move away a little bit, and then we'll make it situational some. I personally believe, you can correct me if you disagree, the chip shot is kind of the skeleton for all of these, and then little variations can change trajectory and spin rates and stuff. So just that basic chip shot, you got to, you know, fly the ball some, roll it out some, a shot that I feel like is becoming ancient history with the modern day golf ball and all the loft that's appearing on wedges. But talk about the chip shot a little bit, how you see that being played, how you see that being done.
So I just call it like a leading edge shot, right? So if you're hitting a basic chip shot, like a basic chip shot, you should take a slight divot. So I compare it to for those golfers who've ever experienced being in the trees, chipping out into the fairway, branches. I don't know if there's anyone out there that's done that, but I've done it. But that's really a basic chip shot. So you're leading with the hands, you're leading with the leading edge, you're de-lofting the club. It's coming, it takes a hop, little check, rolls out. So that's your leading edge shot, and just compare it to chipping out of the trees. That's exactly the same way.
Okay. Let me drill down on this here, because I see the shot. I see the way you're describing, because the leading edge is a beautiful visual to get that shaft tilted forward. You're de-lofting whatever club you have in your hand. How about stance width, ball position, that sort of stuff too? Because I tend to find most golfers stand too wide for this shot. Well, what say you?
Yeah, very much so. I think I like the feet narrow. Maybe a couple of golf balls between your feet would be probably good. That's a good way to start it. And the reason why we want a little lateral, but the wideness, if you widen your feet up, there's a good chance you'll move more than what you should. So, and also it depends on, like, say, the basic chip shot like that, you're very much on top of it. It's kind of an upright setup with a narrow stance, and then you drive forwards.
Yeah.
Like you with a branch.
Hey, you've set it up nicely. I want to ask this because there seems to be, maybe I'm just choosing to look at it this way, but when I turn on Instagram or whatever, I hear every golf instructor, and I'm using that term loosely, talking about, strong face, orient the face and rotate through the ball. And then I'm watching some poor club golfer trying this on a basic sort of little greenside shot. There's excess rotation, the control, the power, the whole thing is completely out the window. So talk to me a little bit about the swing of the arms, the movement of the body, and how they work in harmony as you see it on a shot like this, please.
Yeah, so like the basic shot, I mean, there's obviously no closing of the face, and there's no opening of the face. And this is where it becomes kind of tricky, because the average golfer, you don't know what they're starting with. Are they starting rolling the face open, or they're starting closing the face open? You want limited rotation in the face. I mean, if I'm watching the face go back, it's not doing anything. I'm watching the face at impact and coming through, it's really not doing anything. And that applies to pretty much every single shot. So if you look at whatever loft you start with at the beginning, the face is obviously going to look very different. So a square face on a basic chip is going to look close to someone's eye on the backswing, just because it started kind of leaning on it. And then vice versa, someone opens the face and they say, well, I've got my face perfectly square on the backswing, but that means it's closed, because it should be open if it opened from the beginning. So very little rotation in the face.
Awesome.
Critical.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I love it, because it's just the skeleton of the big stuff, really, to me. The ball position, certain folks would advocate this a little more back in the narrow stance. Where are you on this, or is that just a function of the lie and the sort of trajectory the player is wanting?
You got to throw out there's no right there. So if you're hitting a basic chip shot and you're trying to hit it a little harder, you might play it on the back end of your right foot. If you play a little softer, maybe. So I've watched Seve, I've watched some of the great players. Obviously a basic chip shot is played more towards the back foot. It could be inside of the right foot to outside of the right foot. It's all okay. So it's like, it depends. And it goes back into, you're in the trees chipping out to the fairway. How low do you need to hit it? How far put it? So, but the basic fundamentals is around somewhere in the back stance.
Well, I'm guessing, as I hear you describe it, and you're doing a beautiful job of painting the image for the viewer and the listener. This is one of those things, folks. Go there around the green, toss balls everywhere, any sort of lie, and you just start to fiddle around, and you realize that off different places, different hills, side slopes, whatever, you'll find the ball moving around, and you react to where it is, huh?
Exactly, 100%. All
right, sweet. Let's take this thing a bit more airborne. So the chip is flatter, a little less fly, a little more roll. Now the pitch shot, that basic one, you've drawn the good lie, you greenside. It's one of those where I'm an on-course announcer on tour, and you just see certain shots where the player gets there and he looks at the line, he looks at the green, and you can see them, their eyes light up because now they're thinking make. Most of the folks watching this are getting there going, shit, don't want to ruin this thing. So let's talk about the basic chip shot, please.
So the basic chip shot is really so I call the back in the stance basic pitch a number one. Mm-hmm. Okay, this is a number one shot. So the number two shot, which is describing the pitch shot, is the same shot as the number one, only you've adjusted the club face and moved the ball a little further forward in the stance. You're still making the same motion, and you're still driving it down exactly the same way as if you were hitting underneath a branch. So your body still thinks, or your mind still says, I'm hitting a low shot. But because you've got an open face and the ball position slightly further forward, your body can go ahead and hit a low shot, but the ball will fly higher because it's reacting to the club face being more open.
I'm glad you say that, because I think the typical golfer who's never watched a Gabe Hjertstedt with a wedge or a Seve with a wedge, and I've seen that, and that was a symphony, right? And then you watch modern day guys on tour, their pitch shots fly a little lower than people think. And there's never any effort to try and elevate the thing. The ball's essentially being compressed off the face still, and then it flies out there and it's flying with some air, a little check when it lands, and then it goes ahead and releases.
So that's where the amateur goes wrong, because they always open the face. Now they think they need to add more loft. So the guys listening out there, guys and girls listening out there, so off the basic leading edge chip shot that you normally would hit, like the low shot, the pitch shot, all you do is you open up the face, put the ball position forward, and still hit a low shot, and they'll give you the secret sauce for that shot.
Secret sauce. Hey, I love it. I'm assuming, this is halfway educated because I live and die by your videos on Instagram, and I'm oftentimes using them as examples for folks, because you always seem with your body to respond to the swinging of the club, where it never looks like the body's the real driver and you're pulling the club around your body on this stuff. I'm assuming that the body rotation here is really a function of moving support for the swing of the club in the arms, huh?
Exactly. So I believe that anyone that's a halfway decent golfer does not need to think about body rotation when they're hitting a chip shot.
I'm celebrating in the background here. I wish folks were watching. You preaching, brother. Go for it.
So anyone out there that's talking about turning and twisting your body on a chip shot is way off out of line, because they're way excessive. We are hitting a shot that's 10, 15, 20, 30 yards. You don't need your body. You need arms and constant speed to get the distance right.
Oh, I think I've just found the clip we're going to use on social media to promote this podcast. I love that you've talked about that. I love that you've been kind of forceful about it to a certain extent, because these shots, you get certain greenside shots. You've seen them even in tournaments where you're just like, oh, stuff can go wrong. I'm just trying to sort of avoid disaster. But then you get shots like this from a decent lie in the fairway, where you get there, and no matter your skill level, you should get this up onto the surface, give yourself a legit look for the pass save or whatever. And most folks, because they're overexerting themselves and trying to do too much, end up screwing the thing up. And then they're writing 5 or 6 or even worse in the cards sometimes because of it.
Exactly. And it's really interesting, because it's like, that's what I tell a lot of even pros. I mean, you see it all the time. I've been told to rotate through the shot, and I said, listen, you're a great player. I'm pretty sure your body's going to rotate. You don't need to think about that. But it's like, it's the excess of that stuff. And I don't know where that stuff comes from, because it's like, I just look at it like, listen, you're about to hit this 15 yards and your body looks like you're about to hit it 80. So there's the problem. Start right there.
All right. Well, so we've gone shot number 1 and shot number 2. So I'm assuming then that the more elevated lob shot is shot number 3. Am I right in my train of thought?
Or the flop shot, the 3. So, and it's really, it's a pretty simple shot. I mean, it normally takes me less than 2 minutes on a 36 handicap to show them how to hit a flop shot. So it's one of the easiest shots, and I think that everyone, even listening to this podcast here, we cut out for a second. You still there?
Yeah, we're good. Yeah, go ahead.
Even listening to this podcast here, you'll start that the flop shot will be one of your favorite. And I'll explain it the way I do it. Right hand, long backswing. Okay. Right hand to left collarbone with a fully rotated right foot. So it's really a long to long swing. So it's a long backswing, a long through swing. So, and if you apply that with a slight little bit of weight on the left foot at address, slight, it doesn't need to be too much. It's pretty hard to screw this up.
Mm-hmm. I need to talk about this. And I've given countless lessons in the past where, look, I love your explanation too. And folks can go and find that on your Instagram account where you had the yellow cap with the yellow shoes and there was a tightish line. You just whipped this ball off the grass up there nice and close. Long to on your left collarbone, shoulder. But it's a languid, lazy sort of a pass. And I don't think golfers realize that you can swing long, yet not accelerate through the ball. Because everyone always seems like they've got to get faster through it. And then they do this, and then they whip the thing too far. So talk about just that pace control and almost allowing the weight or the mass of the club to propel the thing to the target.
Yeah, and you see that with a lot of pros that I go and see too. They're very excessive in some of their flop shots, you know. So think about, so depending on the shot, you're trying to hit a shot to make the ball fly slow in the air, obviously with some spin. So it's floating with some spin. So you need a slow swing to make the ball fly slow. You're not going to have a fast swing to make the ball fly slow. So by swinging long, you can bring some speed into it without hitting the ball. So I mean, example that I'm swinging back and it looks like a slow motion shot because of the length of the swing. I'm able to match up a speed to the distance of the shot. So it comes out soft and nice, lands on the green soft. Now, if I've got a short swing and I'm trying to hit it high, the speed of excess is coming into the ball. So I need to match the face absolutely perfect, maybe to have a chance to hit it. So I always say swing slow to make the ball fly slow.
I love that. And as you describe it, I can see how your arms moving back and forth. And I sort of see a Steve Stricker. I see a modern day Justin Thomas. And I see a situation too where it's like a 1-to-1 ratio between how fast their hands are going and how fast the club head's going. And I guess just to put a bow on this one, you talked about, excess or limited face rotation. You're talking about limited wrist work in this thing too. It's more of like an arm pass. It's long and wide to sort of shorter and narrower, but still long on the through swing.
Exactly. And I think that the through swing is what the key is here. So if you can develop a nice spot to finish this swing off, then the player can relax enough to sort of let the ball get in the way of the swing. And that's really the secret for this. Like if you have this shot under pressure, you have to swing it and let the ball get in the way. Well, you're not interfering with anything because if you just make your swing, that ball's going to get in the way and it'll be a perfect shot every single time. Now, I learned that in Australia of some really hard pan stuff with my coach. And that's really where, and you played off that stuff too. You know what I mean? It's like you get up there and if you flinch a little bit, that ball's boned across the green. So
that was my next question because look, this one for most golfers is a function of a nice perky lie where the thing is not down too much. But, with most folks, they get over there and they look down at this thing and then they're like, oh God. And the next thing they do flinch or they do react and stuff goes wrong. So I'd like you to look at them and say, I work with the best. Now I'm saying to you, look, this is easy if you do it correctly. But if there's a situation where you're not so sure, perhaps you go to something a little bit more repeatable. Do you get where I'm going here?
Exactly, 100%. So obviously you got to play within what you're capable as well. But I think let the ball get in the way. And I think that's becomes really the story for golf in general.
That is, you know what, that is such a good take. And it's with that I want to build on this further because I feel like when a player can learn this technique that you're describing with a lob shot, then you can learn like a floating wedge from 40, 50 yards away. And you can build on this sort of stuff, and you can hit that touch bunker shot as well. So learning this and practicing this, despite it going wrong once or twice, is not a bad thing. That's sort of as it eases its way into the longer clubs, don't you think?
100%. And it's really the same shots up to 80, 90 yards. I would say you can use the same techniques, depending on the player. I mean, you say 60 to 70, it's the same stuff. You just add speed, change the loft a little bit, change ball position. But it's all basics from a 5-yard chip to a 70-yard shot. It's the same stuff.
And with that changing speeds and stuff, that's the kind of stuff, because now I'm talking to practice a little bit too, because now they've got the technique, they understand it, they listen to the stuff, they go to the practice facility, and then you practice off different lies and different slopes and stuff. But you can practice that slow one with a chip, and you can practice that slow one with a pitch as well, huh?
Exactly. So, you can do pretty much any club. So it works straight up the board, and for me, I don't change clubs that much. And I've just gone, it's been one of those things from a young kid. I always use my 60, so I just feel comfortable with that.
Mm-hmm.
Only time I put my 60 away was my first year on the European tour, because I was watching Seve chip, and I happened to ask Seve if he was using a 60. And he said, if you know what you're doing, you don't need a 60. So I took it out of the bag. And I stuck it back in, because I realized, listen, if he would have grown up with a 60, he would have used it 100%.
Said exactly the same thing to me. I'll never forget. It was at the BMW, then used to be in Munich. They're just south. I think it's just south of town. There's the range, and there's this little chipping area with this little green that looks like an upside down boob that was about 5-6 feet across. And guys are bouncing the thing over the top of it, and it's firm. And he comes in there with a pitching wedge and floats these balls in there. One jump, stop. And he sort of smiles in his street shoes, right? Puts the club down and he moves on, because he was just special that way.
Exactly. Incredible.
Yeah. Speaking of incredible, you are the folks can see all the stuff, but I do now, because Australians or Swedish Australians, whatever you are, South Africans, we all pretty handy out of bunkers. You have to be down in Australia. The take on the greenside bunker shot, because once a player knows how to play it, it's pretty easy.
Yeah.
So many folks they're daunted by greenside sand. So just help us a little bit here. Give us your overall impressions on hitting the bunker shot well.
I'll give you the reason first why they're very good in Australia and South Africa out of bunkers, because we grew up with bunkers with no sand in them, because the golf courses couldn't afford to replenish the sand all the time. So we grew up with super firm bunkers. So the only way to get it out was to hit about 1/4 or 1/2 an inch behind the ball every single time. So, and what that teaches you, and I think every bunker shot should be played the same. So it taught you to hit very close to the ball, and it also taught you to be down into the ground, because you have to get through the crust of that firm bunker. So there you have the formula: close to the ball and down into the sand hard. So, and when I talk to people about, 1 inch behind, 2 inches under the ball, and 6 inches in front of the ball. That's the secret. So, and I think that's why you see, all Australians and South Africans and even South American players, they grew up with no sand in the bunkers. The only way not to scull it across the green was to hit super close to it and really be down into the sand.
Yeah, if memory serves me, and I'm 50, about to be 52, so it doesn't that well. But I've talked to Jeff Ogilvy, and he's been on the show too. And he talks too about, like you say, the 6 inches down below, how you're not afraid to really lengthen the base of the arc and hit close to it. And yes, you feel like you're going down, but you're not digging into this deep sand you got here. You almost just slicing the sand out from under the ball. And there's a lot of propellant and a lot of speed there through the swing too.
No, exactly. And I feel like, good bunker players, and you can go like, I think good bunker players, most of them use their right hand. There's some left-handers out there that use their left hand, but I feel like it's a fast motion with the right hand underneath. And that really sets you up for success every time. And if you want to take it's the same thing as some of the other shots. You can play them fast, you can play them slow, you can play them with a little leading edge, little shaft lean into the ball to send it out low. But it's all about controlling how far behind the ball. So if you can control that you're hitting, I would say, from half an inch to 1 inch behind the ball every single time. Learn to do that first, and then everything else will take care of itself.
So 1 inch behind the ball, 2 inches deep, and then you said 6 inches beyond. So that's allowing that club to create that swath of sand that elevates the ball. It's not like you're trying to lift this club back out the sand, right?
That's where you see that the average player is always trying to lift it out. And they listen, that's why you have to open the club up so you can actually hit down and stay down. And once they realize that gives you the balance that you're looking for. But it's really exactly what you said, what we said. It's like the continuation of the divot. So it's saying that we are striking it down and staying down. That's it.
I want to ask you this. You say you personally, I mean, you're still a wizard around the greens, that you basically go with your most lofted wedge. I sort of advocate for a lot of club golfers, if they've got a long bunker shot, not to be afraid to change clubs and do the same thing.
Yeah.
Are you of the same opinion?
Yeah, definitely. So I feel like, ladies especially, or if you haven't got the speed, and depending on the softness of the bunkers. So say, for example, I'm playing somewhere where the bunkers are soft because they could afford all that nice new sand. And it becomes, I'll actually end up almost going to a pitching wedge sometimes out of the bunker. The softer the sand, grab a little less loft and open it up, you'll have more bounce.
I've got Gary Player in the back of my head, so I have to ask you this question. I've got Mr. Player there, and he's leaning on his front leg like this, and he's talking about striking the match mark, and you strike the match, and you're on your front leg, and you see, and I will be honest, I have not seen videos of you from the sand, but I'm assuming with the way you're describing where you strike in relation to the ball in the sand, the depth that club's traveling into the sand, that you are favoring your lead side throughout this motion. There's never any drifting backward, even if you've got to elevate the thing real high, right?
So there's never any, it's probably, I watched Gary play a lot, played a couple of practice rounds with him at the British Open one year. But, it's definitely probably 70-30 left foot. And the key is like, I feel like the head needs to stay very still out of the bunker. It's like, I like moving my head forward on chip shots and stuff, but when you're in the bunker, it almost feels like the head is being held there by a string, and it's just super, super still until after I've struck the sand.
All right, love it. The plugged bunker shot. I'm taking this further now. I was not going to address this, but I feel like we have to, because you've done a great job of describing course conditions here in the US, where there is a lot of sand in bunkers, and a lot of bunkers are really pluggy, and a lot of folks don't really know how to play properly from this sort of stuff. So you got the firmer bunker where you can sort of square up the face, you can open a little if you need to. Talk about plug lies and that sort of nasty stuff, how you can get the ball out there with no real issue, because I seem to find players going about it the wrong way when I'm watching them.
Yeah, so I've really got 3 different styles for plug bunker shots. One is, if you're strong enough, you can just play a regular shot and just blast it even deeper in through under the bunker. Like, just open your face and just say, okay, instead of going 2 inches under, I'm going to go 5 inches under it. But you need a lot of strength for that. The other one that you see is like totally completed hooded club. People, that haven't got the strength, so they turn the club, instead of having a square club face, they probably turn it about 40 degrees shut, and then just let the leading edge of the toe dig down so the club actually gets down underneath the ball. And then you got the Greg Norman version where he's, super low hands and digs the heel of the club into the sand and makes it go underneath the ball that way. But the bottom line is you got to get the club underneath the golf ball. So if the ball is plugged 2.5 inches under the ground, now you got to have to get the club at least 3.5 inches underneath the sand. So that's the goal.
I'm so glad you're putting it that way, where you talk about the depth of the club or the lowest point of its arc in relation to the ball, because most folks, even good players, right, they get in the sand and the ball's down there and they sort of halfway look at the lie. They don't really consider it because they just, well, the mindset is like, well, I just got to get out of here. Where no matter the lie, what the lie is, you got to get that thing to pass underneath there properly. And I feel like if they change their focus to that process, they'll likely be more consistent.
Oh, it's much better. It's interesting. And then depending on the strength of the player, they got to do either hooded, hands low, or regular bunker shot.
Mm. Along those lines, like if you watch any PGA Tour professional give some one or other tip on YouTube or TV or whatever, the first thing they go to is a lot of loft because they have the luxury of the speed. Then you have the, I don't know, even 12, 13, 14 handicap, or maybe even a little lower, who doesn't play with a lot of speed. They try this and they hit these dead ducks that don't really go anywhere onto the green. Talk to those folks to say, hey, really opening the face is sort of reserved for the high speed elite golfer. Are you getting where I'm going here, or am I wrong?
And I feel like there's one little trick though there, that the average golfer, if they do want to open their face and look like a professional player, they still need to understand to lead with their hands. But what they can do to counter it, because a lot of the times when they open their face and they hit those little dead ducks, it's because the face, as it comes into the grass, reopens. So they actually add additional loft at impact. So what they can do is release the toe of the club as they hit the ball, and that will counter what the extra opening would be. So they actually counter it that way. But otherwise, I feel like unless you practice a lot, unless you're willing to spend, quite a few hours chipping and really understanding it, then going with a 56 degree and opening up is just as good as a lob wedge.
We'll talk about spending time. You spend a lot of time with us. I'm thankful, as are all of the fans. Departing shot. Now, I've talked about lies and practicing from different lies, and you've spoken of the benefit of practicing off firm lies, which I completely agree with if you want to get precise. But, we're going to find the ball in the rough once in a while. So talk about that greenside pitch shot from the rough some and just how you approach it. Does ball position change? Just minor modifications for success.
So what I would say is, like, experiment with lies. So you have one that sits deep, so it's right on the ground, and there's a lot of grass above the ball. And then you have one that's medium, sitting down, so there's a little bit of room underneath the ball. And then you have one that sits up. Yeah. So it'll be the three different shots. Now, obviously, same thing applies here. The club needs to get underneath the ball. So if the ball is sitting up, it's a lot softer of a swing because there's more room underneath. So you got to guard against going underneath it. The medium shots, where you have some resistance in the grass, you would start slicing it just a little bit and adding some speed depending on how thick the grass is. And when the ball is sitting all the way down, that's when you intend to start accelerating through the ball a lot and making sure that the bottom of the club actually gets to the dirt underneath the ball. So I think all of these will be slightly more sliced because the grass tends to grab the club and shut the face. So, and you should play these slightly more open with the face to guard against that as well.
Awesome. All right. Final take. I've always been, this is maybe my failed career. Well, I was successful, but failed career as a golfer because now I teach and talk about the game. But I've always been of the impression now that any greenside shot, you have to give your putter the chance to be the star. And there are just certain shots where you don't want to end up having to chip or pitch twice. So speak about just, expectation management for folks, because I think oftentimes they're selecting and trying shots maybe that really aren't on.
Exactly. And that's where you got to feel like, you play within your limits a little bit. And if the shot looks difficult, it probably is. So, expectations should be, try to get, within a, somewhere where you can actually make the putt. Mm-hmm. Instead of trying to pull off the perfect shot, which even you see tour players miss all the time because they are trying to pull off the perfect shot, and they walk off with a double instead of a bogey, and that's the difference between a top 10 or a missed cut. So they definitely think like that as well. So I think normally when you're in trouble, don't make a disaster out of it. That's really the bottom line.
You know what, folks? We giggle, both Gabe and I, but you know, we've seen and experienced the game, and that was wisdom. That's like Socrates with a yellow hat on there. Listen, you're a legend, man. I appreciate you joining us. I appreciate your take on this. For the folks who want to find out more, perhaps even hook up with you, direct them to a website if you have social media. How can they reach you? How can they find you?
Golf on Instagram and gabegolf.com. And you guys can find me there. But and I've got a wedge out too. That's really great. You know, I've got a 61-degree wedge. I got a 56 coming. It's called a Surgeon. I've designed it. I make it. I mean, everything is my personal touch on a golf club, and I'm really excited about it. I got some good players starting to use it. So, but gabegolf.com and at gabegolf on Instagram. Thank you.
And they can find the Surgeon on the website.
That's correct.
All right, folks, there you have it. Go and get yourself one. It's guaranteed to shave strokes off your score. Hey, Gabe, man, I appreciate you. You're one of the best, and I'm so thankful you would join us. So take it easy.
Thanks for having me on. Thanks.